And since I ran in the 1st district, the first campaign I ran, they ran the anti-immigrant ads against me because my opponent at that time, the sitting congressman, that's when the first time they were talking about building the wall in 2006. And I asked him in a debate, I said, how big is it going to be? Well, I don't know. He said, why are you concerned about that? Because I said, I want to invest in the ladder factory that's bigger than your wall. It's coming. And I can tell you what, the folks in Hormel are the folks, and the CEO of Hormel brought out a group of dreamers to DC and stood with them. The idea, and every chance we get, is this nation, and it's not lip service, you need to tell it from the platform that we have, this nation was founded on immigration. This nation is better for our immigration laws, are better today. Our diversity increases our opportunities, it increases the beauty of our communities, and we need to make sure that anything that is done to demonize that community is stopped. And I can tell you, if you want to know from me, and this is still one of the most moving things for me, the week after I was elected in 2006, that giant ice raid happened in Worthington, you know. I drove out to Worthington as the congressman-elect, went into the basement of the Catholic Church where Father Brixus was, who asked me to look around at all the children were crying, and he said, this is what terrorism looks like in America today. And he was very concerned. And there were women when they found out that tried to explain who I was. People were trying to leave, and what I told them at that time is I said, I hold the voting card in my pocket, and the votes I will take will be to make sure that we protect these folks. So right now, more than ever, please don't give up on comprehensive immigration reform. Please keep telling the story. Please keep understanding that the vast majority of our neighbors understand this. And you know what? You can say this message with every sovereign nation has the right to control its border in a legal manner. We should do that. But what we need to be very clear with our neighbors about is that there is no line for people to go get into. There is no opportunity to come in legally. And the folks that are here, you tell me that this is the nation that the gentleman talked about what our founders had. We're not originalists. We believe that we continue to grow towards a more perfect union. I have a gentleman in the 1st district who was here and was on an extend. His visa expired. He stayed. He created a life here. He had no criminal record. He had 22 years of adding to our community. He had jobs. He did not have permanent legal status to be here. His 2 young daughters were assaulted. He went to the police to tell them he was arrested and deported, and not the thing to do. That's not who we are. And so when people try and tell you sanctuary cities are ways for people to violate laws, our police are serving us and protecting our communities. Our citizens need to know that if they go to the police to report a crime either against themselves or someone else, that they're going to be protected to be able to do that. And our police don't ask immigration status because it's not their job to do that. Their job is to protect that.
Would not give up on comprehensive immigration reform yet. Just 4 years ago, there was a bill that the Senate was proposing, and then the world went to hell. So we will take the world back, and we will be able to stand up for our neighbors and invite them into this country. And I will tell you, I stood on the stage at Inver Hills Community College last night, and I watched the best of America. I watched America walk across that stage. And that particular college is about a 35% immigrant community, 35% people of color. It's just the most amazing thing in the world. So I haven't given up. I will tell you that, watch what we say, but also watch what we do. On Saturday night, I was at the American Muslim Democratic Caucus dinner, and we have to work together. Senator Carlson was with me because my wife stood me up, and Senator Carlson was my date. And his wife Gail said I could be his date. He trusts me with him, so it's all good. We're good. But we have to help our Muslim neighbors.
Yes.
We have to invite them into our homes. We have to invite our neighbors to come meet them. We have to be the kind of people that we want to see in the world. And just like that 2012 marriage equality fight, you know what won that? We stood up and we said, I'm your neighbor. And we stood up and we said, my kid plays baseball with your kid. That's how we win, is we get to know each other as people.
And I'm very concerned about a lot of the things that we've talked about here today, especially democracy, healthcare, immigration, all of it. But I am very worried about our environment, the health of our planet. I think
Yeah.
that I'm very worried for our parks, there's the rollbacks on the air. I think we're running up against time. I don't know if we have time for the next election.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. I'm a geographer by training, if you will. And there was a gentleman in here, where's he at? He had on the Glacier National Park shirt, right there. Told him my family and I went out there last year and kind of a sense of urgency because the glaciers are almost gone, for one thing. Let's be very clear, and this is my hope for you and the activism in this is that it's very apparent to me, and all of us have known for quite some time, climate change is real and that is not a disputable fact. The question is the commitment to trying to do something about it. I'm convinced that by the next presidential election, everybody running for office on both sides. Remember, it was only a few years ago that Newt Gingrich and Nancy Pelosi sat on that couch together and told us we had to address climate change. Newt forgets about that now. They did that commercial. The opportunity is there. I think it's on the horizon, but I think your sense of urgency, I'm sharing that we're going to have to make the investments necessary to get there. I think an Achilles heel and one of an American strength, I oftentimes talk about this, is that we believe we can science our way out of it all the time. That's why The Martian is our favorite movie. We'll just science our way out of it or whatever. I do remain hopeful on it, but I think the time is now, with the president talking about trying to revert away from the Paris agreements. Again, we need to message this. This is not only the right thing to do, and it's not only an existential threat to the planet, but we can make a lot of money doing that. And so I don't understand, and this is the case I'm making, it makes no sense to me that if you're a conservative Republican or even a libertarian, why they got sucked into this trap that they had to disagree with climate change. It has nothing to do with conservative ideology. Here's what I keep hoping is, I hope the Koch brothers embrace that and just get rich as heck building solar panels and everything else they need to do. So when I'm with you, change the message, make the case to people. They've got us in a real bind on this, but I share your concern on this. I think time is running out to make the difference. And so let's show that sense of urgency. Left-handed again. I forget I'm right-handed. We're going left-handed. So yes, sir.
Hi, Mike Johnson. I'm from Redwood. My wife and I are political refugees from the state of Minnesota.
Welcome.
And if you want to know how bad things can get in Minnesota, just look. And I say that with no. One of the things I learned in the state of Wisconsin, watching hard to find in Wisconsin to Mississippi, is how the Republican Party is jealous and something people have to put our war on public employees and to vote retired people. One of the things that we recommend, and there have been all these topics have been great in our employees. Right now I'm kind of concerned about health care for a variety of reasons, not only for myself and taking the women. One of the things that concerns me, first of all, is that I have not heard much actual mention of universal health care, and I will not financially support any candidate who will not support it.
I support universal health care.
Because I'm sick of my wife spending hours on the phone wrangling with insurance. She's a business family. She's going to be the one to do it. And I'm sick of the wasting part of her life wrangling with insurance companies. The other concern I have is watching the Republicans work in Wisconsin. Health care. Another way of thinking about it is to grow Medicare for all. The question was asked earlier, what are some of the arguments the Democrats can make? I want Democrats to make that argument really loud and clear, cognizant of the fact that the Republicans are going to come back and people currently on Medicare say they're going to take away from you, you're not going to see a doctor, and all this crap. And I really want Democrats to think carefully about this issue and be ready to assure people currently on Medicare that they're not going to lose the thing. We're going to make the system better, cheaper, and more inclusive, and people don't have to worry about Medicaid
exactly, that I think they've opened up the space again for us to go after this, and I think the logical conclusion that most people have looked at this, certainly every other industrialized nation in the world, including Australia that President Trump loves, have gotten to that point. I would say that the point, that was a very good point at the end, that we need to think carefully about this, not rush into it in terms of missing an opportunity that's here to get this right. And one of the things we get as a member of Congress, people calling, there's a bill in the House right now on a single payer plan, whatever, people are writing, and a lot of times co-sponsoring the legislation or not, but I'm talking to people, the piece of legislation that's in the House right now doesn't address what we're going to do with the VA system as it stands right now. So we need to wrap that in, Indian healthcare, TRICARE and all that. But I think you're exactly right. We know who they are. We saw their plan. They're caught in the weeds. They're not talking to Eric and his family. They're not talking to you and your wife. Why don't we come up with this? Because I feared that Trump might be a change agent in certain ways where he was going to do the damage he's doing now. But I also thought there might be a silver lining. I thought that he might just be on the fringe enough like that he might just co-opt single payer, put it in, say they did it, and people would vote Republican for the next 30 years. That's what I thought he was going to do. He didn't have the courage or the vision or whatever. So I agree with you. As far as the states go on this and the Wisconsin thing, I have to tell you this, my campaign team has my unofficial slogan for governor. They said, it's Walz or Wisconsin. So, that's my unofficial theme.
You know, I just add to your healthcare comment. I think we have to get to universal health care. It is more complicated than the Republicans understand getting to universal health care, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's a public option. What I don't want to see happen, though, is what is it, 80% of employees get their health care through an employer. I can tell you, I managed, we didn't use an insurance company, actually. We self-insured our employees. We used a company only to administer our plan. So I saw exactly what we paid for and how we paid for it, and we worked on preventive medicine so that employees would be healthier and costs would be lower. So I've actually managed a plan like that. What I don't want to see is a $120 million tax cut for a corporation. So keep in mind when you start talking about, you know, let's make sure that on the other side of this, companies are still participating in the health of their employees.
Good point. I think that's what you're saying. Be smart about it, get it in, fix this, take it off the table, and watch the economy just boom, and watch people's lives get better. And this is our time. I mean, this is the time to do this. Exactly. That's the message to people. If you're a teacher, we always use Maslow's hierarchy, and we as progressives always want people to be self-actualized because it's an existential fix we're going to make for the planet. Let's start talking to them. It's going to give them more money and they're going to be rich or whatever it might. Start talking more to the bottom of Maslow instead of the top, and people will come along with us. So, sir. I would have planted that question if I could. Last week before we left, 9 of us reintroduced a proposal, a bill in that the president must get a new AUMF, authorization for the use of military force. The idea that the president is using, and I've asked for this, and this is bipartisan. My friend Walter Jones is on this. This is bipartisan. The president is using the authorization to go into from Syria to everywhere else. And we all know that that is a hellish situation that we need a national dialogue on. But the president is using the attacks on 9/11 AUMF is still the one that's being used for these other military engagements. It is absolutely ludicrous. As a member of Congress, I'm absolutely appalled that we would give our authority, which is vested in us, it's clear in the Constitution that we're the ones that are supposed to do this. The reason that it's there is, if we're going to send your sons and daughters to die, I need to stand right here and I tell you why I did that. We cannot give it away. We cannot give it to a president, even though I think he surrounded himself with some pretty stable folks over at Department of Defense. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Encourage your representative, if you can get through to them, to sign on to the authorization for the use of military force to be renegotiated, redebated on the House floor, and re-voted on before the president is allowed to use any military force anywhere. That's the first thing that we can do. The second thing that we can start to do is to tell people the president's budget is asking for $56 billion more for defense, at the same time that he's cutting the State Department and all of the other pieces of soft power that prevent and trying to fight against famine relief in Sudan and those types of things. All of us know, and I am the ranking Democrat on the VA. I spent 24 years in the military. I can tell you what I know best about this. Our country wants us to give the best possible care to our veterans. The way we ensure our veterans get the best possible care is don't create any more of them. That is the best way. I think you're getting another one. No, he's standing. That gentleman's been standing for 2 hours. He just wants a chair, okay.
Lots of chairs up front.
President Walz, Angie, nice to see you again. For those of you who don't know me, my name's David Snyder. I ran for the 6th Congressional seat against Tom Emmer. But my question has to do with labor. Now, last year, the building trades, on an average, 40% voted Republican. Union membership overall, 33% voted Republican. Now, we're afraid, of course, of right to work coming into the state of Minnesota, but also ended up being a national bill as well. What are you going to do to win labor back? And also keep in mind that not everybody has the skills or the education or the capability of either for these higher technical jobs. We have to provide jobs not only for the highly skilled, but those with less skills. So it has to be across the board. Where do you stand on making the country a minimum of $15 an hour wage so that people working at a minimum wage job can live off of that money? Not have to worry about putting a roof over their head or working 2 or 3 jobs. So my question is, how are you going to win back labor, and what are you going to do as far as skill-wise and bringing jobs for those that don't necessarily have the higher skills for these higher?
Well, I would say they're a different skill set. I said the greatest day in my house would be if my son Gus comes home and decides he wants to go be a plumber. That would be a high, because I know he's going to be employed. I know it's noble work. I know he's going to get the skill set. He's actually going to be able to produce that. Your point was right. Labor overwhelmingly voted. I think we see labor as a monolithic group. I saw members up on the, labor members up on the Iron Range say, well, if we're not going to be able to do some of these economic activities, what matter? And this is where this becomes tough choices. Talking about how we do things, how do we do things safely, how do we combine environmental safeguards with economic activities, whether it be farming, whether it be mining and other things, where it is heavily labor intensive for the folks you're talking about. And I think what we have to stop doing is seeing that labor as monolithic and starting to get back with the gentleman, where was he at, asked about what is our policy. We had no economic message that resonated to them, so a billionaire shyster was able to give them a message and felt like he was going to do more for them to create the job, because that nobleness of work and the ability to live where you want to live and do the type of lifestyle you want to do is what was critically important to them. And again, I go back to that quote. they knew more and trusted him more than they trusted us, who stood there. So my pledge to you is, once again, we have to take this notion back of the nobleness of work and labor. That's why you should not pay more taxes for carrying lumber than you do for carrying interest, which you do right now. That's why we need to start messaging back to people of why those things matter and why a living wage, again, Maslow encourages everyone's economy to go up. Gwen was right, and there's a reason it's quoted so much is, when we all do better, we all do better. And I think taking this message, and what I would say is, we need, as progressives, to understand this is not, and the gentleman's point on Wisconsin is very well thought out. There's a professor over there that's written some things on this from Madison that's telling us about this. We need to make the case on this. This isn't labor versus business. This is about the fairness and the nobility of work, and we expect to have a fair share in that. So I can tell you this, that again, I think it's incredibly important that we make sure minimum wage, and I voted on it in the Congress, and in fact, I took a pledge in 2006 and says if we didn't get the minimum wage raised up to a living wage, I would give back my raise every year back to the Treasury, which, by the way, is 4 times more than Trump gave back in that damn ceremony he did. But you know what? As Minnesota, but as Minnesotans, I lived in Minnesota. Now I told you it, so it doesn't count. But the point being on it is, you know that's true. The point being, you're being exactly right on this, that we should talk and we should fight and we should make sure it gets there. But those labor folks who voted for Trump are aspiring for more than $15 and that. They're aspiring for a career in there. We need to make sure, as Angie said, all of the training is there. We put an emphasis on it. Parents, teachers, schools are focusing on that. And then we go to those folks to let them know who's on their side. And so when I go into the labor halls, whatever, and we need a conversation amongst all of us on this, that who are we, and again, whether you're progressive, Republican, or whatever, what are we as a society want to get to? How do we want jobs to look like? And go to those people with some ideas that why we're different. So I ask you to think differently as you see labor. Frustrating as heck to me to know that labor in many cases voted overwhelming. Hell, 2/3 of veterans voted. And the first thing, the bill they tried to bring up was to tax the GI Bill. And we have to make them convinced we're on their side. And thanks for running too. It's good to see you.
David, I just want to add to that. Look, I think we got to go have those conversations directly with labor. I mean, I'm standing here, I had every labor endorsement from the state of Minnesota. Why did they turn and vote for Donald Trump? And I can tell you a lot of it was the populist economic messaging that Trump gave them. The idea that healthcare costs are taking up every single bit of any extra money families have, and what are we going to do about that? We've got to remind people, not just through our words, but through our actions, that we're actually working for working families in this country. And I'll tell you why. The company I work for had 2,000 assembler jobs in Minnesota. These are $15 an hour jobs right now without changing the federal minimum wage. And the answer is yes, I would support every American making a living wage. Keep in mind, though, that labor rates vary across this country. So having a minimum wage and an appropriate wage for every region is a different conversation, and we need to make sure that if you make $15 an hour, that you can live working full-time in this region making that.
And don't forget either that a lot of those folks thought you were going to take their guns. And we need to start having a conversation about, we're perfectly fine with you exercising your Second Amendment rights, but we're not perfectly all right with you taking it into a school or wherever else it was. And I think we as a party need to have this. This is a family discussion we all need to have, because I'm telling you, there's nothing more gratifying. Last year we have this congressional shoot thing for charity, whatever, and I was the top gun in that, and I was riding back with 30 other Republicans. I said, how does it feel to be outshot by a liberal gun grabber? And so I think making the case about common sense in this, it's the either or, and this, the gentleman from Wisconsin is in tune, and trust me, he knows because he lived it. I can feel it from you. It was the idea of taking something from you, and they made that case. We need to message better that we are perfectly fine with that. But like me, and Angie will have to do this as a member of Congress, no matter where you're at on this issue, It's our responsibility, and I sat in that room with 22 parents from Sandy Hook who looked at the pictures of my son Gus, who was the exact same age as their children when they were shot dead in that school. We as a nation, no matter how strongly you support, which I do, your constitutional right to bear arms, it is absolutely irresponsible and immoral to not figure out how to stop that from happening. And figure out
Take two more questions, Tim, or are we about time? What I want to do before we take one, or you can stop when you want, I'll stop. I just want to acknowledge that anytime someone runs for Congress, it's hard and it's a long, arduous journey. Tim knows that first victory was really tough. And I just want to acknowledge Paula Overby, who's here today, because today, Paula and I see each other a lot, and we're friendly with each other, and I often say, together, we are your representatives.
Anybody, let's do it. This is the fun part, the teacher and me, because we go too long. Let's do rapid fire. 10-second question, 10-second answers if they're possible. And we'll go fast. If it's possible. We can get a bunch in then.
I'll try. Linda Bosman from Eden. With the Affordable Care Act, we need to stop what the Republicans have done, but I'm one of those people. I went from worrying if I could afford insurance the day before the election, thinking, well, now I will never have it. I paid $20,000 a year for my policy. It is the most expensive payment I have ever had in my life. I'm nearly 60, and I don't know how I'm going to manage to hold on as a self-employed woman. I don't know how I'm going to manage to hold on with these changes to get to 65.
Yes, that's right. No, and what happened in Minnesota on election night, especially in the rural districts, Colin Peterson, Rick Nolan, and myself, was less about Donald Trump and more about the ACA and the people who got hit by that. That's why the message, and you were talking about the DNC wanted the message to be the ACA is working fine and don't talk about the warts. I said, I can't do that because it's failing my constituents in a lot of ways. So I hear you loud and clear. I will continue to lean into it. We need to fix it. And that's where I come back to. I do not want them to fail. I want them to put a bill forward that would fix it. And I'm telling you this, if the AHCA had kept to those principles of keeping people covered, of potential health benefits, and done all that, I'm willing to compromise if it would have made some fixes, but it did not do that. Good. That was 25 seconds, not bad.
The contents of my refrigerator are worth more than my house. My son is a hemophiliac, $6,000 in bills. He could be injected himself with gold, and it would be cheaper. Something's got to happen. I mean, who's making that money? Where is that money?
Yeah, amen. Yes. Well, this is, yes. And we have to figure it out. I mean, how do you respond to that? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And Angie brought it up right. Why do we negotiate in the VA for drug prices? They're far cheaper than they are in Medicare. And at some point in time, yeah, no, I hear you. EpiPen and everything else, we know where they're going with that. So I'm okay with people making money. I'm not people getting rich off your son's hemophilia.
Well, and he's 21.
Yeah.
What is he doing? He's 25.
Yeah, that's right.
What is he doing by he's 25?
That's right. No, we got him, sir.
Retired clergyman.
Yay.
Amen.
He hasn't asked his question
Well, let me
yet.
try your question.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between sin and crime?
I think maybe you asked me this over drinks one night. My answer, yeah, he did actually. I have no memory of that answer. But I remember the question. It's one you don't forget.
Well, and again, we've also, the religious freedom thing, I said when we saw equality and we knew the retreating back into the religious freedom was going to be the response to spreading of equality, I, like all of you, deeply worried of where we end up with this, because we know it's not about religious freedom, it's about religious superiority and the implementation of...
Bless you, my son.
So we need to fight it. An interesting one on this is that I think our system still has some resiliency, and this is a real conundrum. I don't know if you've seen this up in Belle Plaine. They have a Veterans Memorial, and they insisted that they were going to put a Christian monument on that, and because of that, they opened the door, so now there'll be a satanic monument on that same ground. And I think people need to think about where that's at. And again, this is a teacher in us. The preparatory set is there in this country. Let's educate folks where they're at. Again, from both of us, what I said is you especially want from your elected officials, and the idea of we're sectarian country, but you don't want us to give a sermon, but you'd kind of like to see us try and live one. And I think that's the one we're trying to do.
I'm glad you brought the religious up because I am a Christian, and that's one of the most divisive things in our party, Christianity.
Yeah.
But I think that when Republicans use Christianity, they use it as a way of fear mongering. When they